Thank you. I apologize, I have a pretty sexy voice today, so I apologize for that. It was nice to know that's going to be video recorded. So today what I was asked to talk to you about actually is how sedentary behavior can actually impact our children's eating habits. And I have to be honest, if I just talked about that very exclusively, we'd be here for about 2 minutes. So I've thrown a couple of other things inside, all relevant though. So I think you've gone over this today. We know what sedentary behavior is, and so I don't really need to go over that again. And we know that our children probably aren't doing as well as they could be with respect to sedentary behavior, and either could we as adults. So let's get right into how this affects our children's diets. If we look at epidemiological studies, so these are these big, huge studies that we look at how much a child is watching TV, and then we actually look at their intake. They consistently demonstrate an increase in food intake with TV viewing. And it's not exclusive actually to TV viewing. We also see it with video games, just listening to music, and also not sleeping enough. So that's just a little plug for good sleep, okay? But we see it with all of these things. Now there's a group in Denmark that actually tried to quantify how much this food intake increased. And basically it equated to about a slice of pizza. So it was an increase of about 230 calories, okay, during that TV viewing. Now what they did is they actually said, okay, if you do that twice a week, okay, and you do it every week for a year, what ends up happening is you get a 3.5 kilogram weight gain increase. Now that's assuming that you don't have any kind of compensatory behaviors, so that you're not exercising more or whatnot. And I think it's a pretty good assumption that we're probably not doing those things. So that 3.5 should be used loosely. But we do know that extra calories over time, repeatedly, can actually lead to a little bit of weight gain, potentially. We also know that we consume about 20 to 25% of our calories while we're watching TV. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit near the end of the presentation as well. So why exactly is this happening? Why do we do this kind of behavior? Well, one is habit, right? Sometimes when we get in front of the TV, it's just something that we do. You know, I always remember watching movies with, you know, my dad in particular, and I couldn't wait because he'd do the popcorn, you know, on the stove, and it was laden in oil and butter, and it was just a wonderful thing that we did together. So habituation is just something that we just have a habit of doing it, right? Or we're sitting there and we're watching TV, and believe it or not, even though we're watching TV, we might be a little bored, right? And we also want to do something else. And so that kind of is one of the things. The other thing is a distraction. So we're distracted by TV, right? Our mind is on TV, it's on our video game, it's on whatever, and we're not really paying attention to the cues that we have to stop eating. So satiation and satiety go out the window, right? So we just keep kind of eating because we're not really paying attention to what we're doing because we're too busy watching Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever it is you choose to watch, okay? So those are the kind of some of the reasons why we think that this is kind of occurring. So what are we eating? Obviously, if we were eating fruits and vegetables, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So what we're doing is we're eating obviously unhealthy foods. And you can see sweetened beverages and the snack type and the sweet type foods. That tends to be what increases when we talk about this increased food intake. What's kind of interesting though is that if you kind of start to look at behaviors and cluster them together, what we find, and you might have talked about this today, this whole idea that you can be sedentary and active, or be sedentary and inactive. They're kind of not the same thing, but they like to cluster together. We find that TV viewing actually clusters with an unhealthier diet pattern. So what we find is that in children that actually spend more and more time in front of a TV, we actually see that their dietary pattern is more westernized. And so when I say that, I mean less fruits and vegetables, I mean more meat, right, more sweetened beverage. And so it's actually an unhealthy dietary pattern. So we also see that as well. So like I said, if I had just concentrated on that, we'd kind of be done. So what I wanted to talk to you though, and this is very, very timely, is marketing to kids. Because that actually does play a really big role in sedentary behavior and its impact on what our children are eating. In fact, it's such a big role that we know that Health Canada right now is looking at it very seriously, and they put out a consultation this summer, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. So basically what we know from a current report from Heart and Stroke is that Canadian children see about 25 million, okay, 25 million food and beverage ads per year from their favorite site. And of course we know that the majority of those are unhealthy foods, okay? What we also know is that per hour of TV, they're probably viewing 4 to 5 ads. Again, most of those ads are reflecting foods that are not really reflective of the dietary pattern that we would like to see. So to date, what have we been doing? Well, Canada put out this children's food and beverage advertising initiative a few years ago. And it was basically just this voluntary measure by industry to reduce the amount of advertising that they were doing with children. It was a voluntary sign-up. You didn't have to do it. I think 19 or 17 companies actually volunteered to do it. And to date, we can probably say that they've been relatively unsuccessful, and I'd actually argue that they had the opposite effect. So there was 2 studies done by Potman's group, and basically what they found was that when they actually looked at the companies that were part of the initiative, and they compared them to the companies that weren't, guess who was advertising more to kids? Oh, yes. So they were advertising more. And what we also saw is during the time that that initiative actually went in effect, advertising to children increased. So, hence why we're doing a mandatory initiative currently. What do people do? I mean, there's lots of things that companies do to market to kids. Lots and lots of things. I'm picking on Red Bull today just because I am, because it's an easy one to pick on. But the use of celebrities and sport figures is something that's quite common, and we'll come back to that in a minute. Sponsorship. Red Bull is probably the one that irritates me the most because they always advertise for extreme risk-taking sports. And you know that appeals to adolescent boys, and adolescents, but more so boys. And so it's always the cliff diving, or the racing, race car driving, and all that kind of stuff. And so it's very much associated with a lifestyle. And so they're very, very good at doing that. Branding, we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Incentives and promotions, we all know the ones with the cereal boxes, right? Buy 5 of my cereal boxes and put all those things in. Oh, sorry. And then you end up with a toy, or you end up with something, right? So we all know about those. So they're quite common. Product placement, we know industry spends a lot of money making sure that their products are at primo locations in certain locations. Advertisements like pop-up ads, I don't know about you, but I'm tired of these. I was just giving a lecture the other day to my students, and I was using some videos off YouTube, and we had to view like 3 ads before I could play a video. So this is very, very rampant. Advert games are kind of something that's coming out. It's kind of timely as well. So these are video games that advertise a branded product in a game. Interestingly, Gatorade just got in some trouble for doing this. I don't know if you saw it in the news. But basically what they were doing is they had some kind of game where they had a character that was like Usain Bolt. And basically when he ate Gatorade or drank Gatorade, he went really, really fast. But when he drank water, he didn't. They obviously didn't see all the work we did on Water Does Wonders. But they got caught, basically, by the California government. It was unlawful to do that. And they paid a whopping fine of $300,000, which pretty much equates to about a penny when you think of their advertising budget. So it doesn't hit them hard, and Gatorade knows better. And then, of course, we have word of mouth as well, right? All this tweeting and all this kind of stuff that goes on. So just to kind of hit home that this actually does impact children, we did 2 studies. And so we talked to children about sweetened beverages, and we talked to adolescents about caffeinated beverages. And we asked them, what influences your decision to purchase products? Guess what major theme came out? Advertising and media, okay? I've listed here some of the things that they said. They love music. They like slogans. I can't tell you how many times I heard Red Bull gives me wings. Okay, that was something that they really knew about. Use of celebrities. This is another thing that drives me crazy because they honestly believe that if they drink Gatorade, they'll run like Usain Bolt. Or they'll play hockey like Sid Crosby, right? Doesn't work that way. But they're kids, right? They're adolescents, they think that, and they want to aspire to be that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Gatorade won't get them there, okay? Repeated exposures, right? Constantly throwing it all the time. And there's a quote down here I'll get to that kind of talks about that. Cool and funny came from the younger kids, right? Anything that's attractive, anything that's fun and goofy, they loved it. The milk, even the milk commercial that came out and the guy was rapping and doing all that stuff, they love that stuff. So if you can grab their attention, they're going to be interested. And I've included kind of two quotes here. One is from the kids, one's from the adolescents. So one of the kids said to us, well, I guess it kind of does, because if you see something on TV, like kind of when you see it, looks so good that you just kind of want to try it and see if you like it, right? They see it, they want to try it. The good news is that they'll try it, but the thing that's going to determine whether they keep using it is taste and preference. The problem is the stuff that's being advertised tastes really good, right? So we've got a little bit of an issue there. The adolescents said, I know that you get more drawn to products that are advertised. Like I'm going to get an energy drink. I'm more drawn to a certain brand because they are advertised so much. So I know they are a better choice energy drink because they are advertised so much. So if you hammer at them enough and repeat exposure enough, they're going to think that they've got to buy Red Bull, right? So we know that this is having a big impact on them. So I just wanted to introduce you to a couple of studies. I can't help it, I'm a professor. And I wanted to introduce you to a couple of studies that kind of hit the point home really well. And I'll explain it so that you understand what I'm trying to say here. So basically what they did is they took kids that were lean, overweight, or obese, okay? And they exposed them to a cartoon. And the cartoon either had food advertisements or non-food advertisements, okay? And they took those groups of kids and they divided them in half, okay? So some got the non-food, some got the food. Then 2 weeks later, they got the opposite. Okay, so all kids were kind of exposed. And at the end of that cartoon, they basically were presented with a bunch of advertisements and said, okay, pick out the ones that you saw. And they wanted to know the recall. The other thing that they did was they presented them with a whole bunch of snacks. Okay, and there was healthy snacks as well as unhealthy ones. It was done in the UK. I think they said they gave them butter puffs. I'm assuming that's something like a croissant. But anyway, they had all this option for them. And they found two things. In the first panel, kind of up on the top there, what they showed was that if you were a lean child, okay, you would actually recall non-food and food advertisements the same. You could still recall quite a few of them, 6 of them. I think there was 8 during the cartoon, so they recalled quite a few of them. But there was no difference between the food and non-food. When you actually look at the overweight and the obese children, they actually recognized more of the food-based. So that's kind of an interesting finding on its own, that the kids recalled more of the food that were overweight and obese. So there might be something going on there, and it's actually worth investigating further. The lower panel also is very interesting. It didn't matter what child it was, but if you show a food ad, basically what this is saying is you're going to eat more. Okay, it didn't matter if you were a lean, obese, or overweight child, you will eat more if you're exposed to food advertising. Okay, and what they also found is that even though after the cartoon with non-food, they did eat a little bit more, because of course they were presented with some nice food, right? So they wouldn't resist. There was actually a difference in the types of foods that they chose. They chose the more unhealthy foods after the food advertising. Okay, so obviously this is having a really big impact. Now, this is the kind of stuff that professors love. This actually, it is because it's a meta-analysis, it's a systematic review. We love these things, and this was just actually put out in 2016. And we love them because somebody has gone and taken all the data and put it together and talked about the totality of the evidence. And basically they took all the studies where they compared students or children that had been exposed to a food ad or a non-food ad, right? That's all they did. They took all the studies and said, what happens? And basically, my bar went a little crazy here. Maybe it went to an Apple computer. It should include the whole group there, but look at the arrow, that's the children. Basically, what this is telling us in the totality of the evidence is that if you're exposed to a food ad, you're going to eat more food. Okay? In adults, doesn't happen that way, but in children, it does. So they seem to be really susceptible. What I would like to see done, I want this done again, right? And I don't know if the studies are there because I can't really find them, is I want to try healthy food and non-healthy food and expose kids that way and see what happens. Because I think food intake might go up a little in both groups, but I definitely think if you expose to unhealthy food, they'll choose unhealthy food. And so we still need to do that data, but this was really good because it's telling us in the totality of the studies that have been done, there's no question that exposure to advertising and food ads increases food intake in children. So what are we doing about this in Canada? This is kind of exciting. It's still under consultation. We haven't figured it out. It's a little controversial, as you'll see in a second, okay? So as part of the healthy eating strategy, Health Canada is considering what to do about marketing to children. I already told you the voluntary measures were a disaster. So now we're going to go mandatory. Right? Or we're thinking about it. I should say we're thinking about it. And basically the consultation in the summer, and they always do this in the summer when everybody's on holidays, but when they do this, what they were looking at is things like the age of restriction. So if we're going to restrict advertising to kids, what age should we consider? It looks like they're going to go 17 or under 17. So if you're 16 years of age or under, that's what they're going to consider here. And they took into account the age of consent for lots of different things, including driving, I think sexual consent, smoking, they took in the drinking. They took it all into consideration, and I think they're going to use the 16 or under. The definition of unhealthy foods, this is highly controversial, and we're going to come back to it in a second. I'll just talk about the other two. The criteria to determine if an ad is actually directed at children. I love to talk to my friends in advertising because they're like, we don't direct that to kids. And I'm like, have you seen the ad? Of course it appeals to kids, right? So they say, oh no, it's for adults or adolescents. And I'm like, no, young kids like it too, right? They just have to see it. So how do we actually determine if something's directed at a kid? Because they're not going to admit to it. So is it the time of day that we have to consider? Right? Is it the percentage of kids that are watching an event, let's say like the Super Bowl? That will be fascinating. Or that go to an arena. We don't really know what that threshold is. The good news is, though, is that other countries have done this, and they have set good guidelines, and that's why we're considering these ones. So we might actually just fall in line with what other people are doing, which is really great. And they're also looking at the types of techniques that will not be restricted. You know industry will be all over that one. So we'll leave that one, but we'll go back to the unhealthy foods. This is very debatable, right? Because we can say, well, we know Cheetos is an unhealthy food, right? But what do we do about the granola bars? Because there's a whole bunch of them and they're all different, and what do we do and how are we going to do this? Nutrition profiling is really the way to go. And you've seen this before because if you go to Loblaws, you've seen the Guiding Stars program, right? And so the nice thing about the Guiding Stars program is I think there's about 10 components of the Guiding Stars program. So you can actually look at all these different nutrients, and that's how they come up with their star system, which is really great. So we already have this in Canada, but in, I don't know whose wisdom, and you can note the sarcasm, is that Health Canada decided only to focus in on the nutrients of harm. So saturated fat, sugar, and salt. So they're not being comprehensive. They're just focusing in on the nutrients of harm. And we'll talk about why that gets a little crazy in a minute. What they're proposing is that we use the percent daily value. You've seen this on the food label, right? And so they're taking the 5%, which we classify as a product that has low in something, or 15, which is a product that has high in something. Okay, so obviously if we're talking about these negative nutrients, is what I'm going to call them, then the 5% is more strict. okay, and the 15% is a little bit more lenient. So they're just proposing this. It's not a done deal, but this is one of the tables that they had in their report, which I found kind of interesting. So this is if we go with the strict version, the 5% version, okay? Green, foods allowed, red, foods not, okay? You'll notice here all the usual suspects are a little bit where they should be. We'll get to a few controversial ones in a second. But you'll notice that it's pretty common. So fruits and vegetables are here. Now notice that it's with no added fat, sugars, or sodium. So fruit cups are out, right? Fruit cups will not be able to be advertised, but fruits and vegetables will. So I don't know how people feel about that, but so there's going to be some controversial things. And one thing we know, whenever you do any kind of nutritional profiling, there's going to be casualties. And we know that there's going to be some of those foods that go in the wrong category, and people like me are going to get really excited. But unfortunately, we have to do that, because if we start opening up the exemption rule, I don't even want to deal with industry there, right? So there will be casualties. If we look on the red, and I want to pay attention to that third kind of column from me, okay, that third column. You've got things like animal cookies, you've got frosted wheat cereal, graham crackers, fishy crackers, granola bars, potato chips, french fries, and calorie-reduced cheese, okay? So those things would actually not be allowed under the 5% rule, okay? If you take a look at the last, right, I don't get excited about the first 2/3. You know, here we go, regular soda, cookies, candies, all the stuff that we kind of expect. But then we start to get into instant oatmeal with sugar. That might be banned. Cheese is going to not be able to be advertised. Sugar-sweetened yogurt won't be advertised, and I'm assuming that will mean the Greek yogurt as well. And I don't care about the waffles and the bagel. That's debatable, because what happens if it's a whole grain bagel, right? So this is the 5%. So watch what happens when you do the 15. Now all of a sudden what Health Canada is deciding is that you can actually, note up the green, you're going to be able to advertise animal cookies, fishy crackers, granola bars, potato chips, and french fries to children, but you won't be able to advertise oatmeal, cheese, or sweetened yogurt. I got issues. This is the danger, okay? I know we're just talking about advertising. We're not talking about the new food guide that's going to come. We're not talking about new dietary advice. But I hope that they would align together. And if this is the way we're aligning our new food guide, now I have a little bit of concern. The other thing too is just going after negative nutrients does not seem to be the way I think I would go. There's good stuff in cheese, you know? And one thing that I don't think they're taking into account is all saturated fat is not created equal. When you look at the data and the totality of the evidence, which is what I have to do as a professor, saturated fat from milk is not a concern. It doesn't come out in analysis as being a major risk. So grouping it with all saturated fat doesn't seem to be a good way to go. Okay, what about protein? You know, I don't know if you've got little ones in your life, but I certainly do, and sometimes they go on this like meat ban, right? And what do? We turn to dairy. We have to turn to dairy. So banning cheese to me, right, and banning even flavored yogurt, because I'm all about, if they get the yogurt and they get the 21 grams of protein in yogurt, I don't care if it has pineapple in it. Okay, so this is very controversial. We're going to be battling it out. Nobody's going to be happy in the end, I'm pretty sure. This is going to take a long time to do, and industry will be on one side, we'll be on the other, and we'll see how it goes. But anyway, this is coming through the pipeline. I'll be interested to see what they learned from the consultation. They certainly got an earful from me. So, what do we do about all this stuff? Okay, so what do we do? I think we still need to build awareness and knowledge around this. I think about sedentary behaviors in general, but also about how that impacts our children's eating. I don't think we know, you know, that eating goes up and maybe it's not so healthy, and maybe we need to get that message out. The other thing that's really interesting is the data I showed you about eating unhealthy and watching TV is largely garnered by what's available in the home. You don't bring it in, it's not there to go get. So I think we still need to talk to parents about their role, and it's not all about them. I agree, it's all of us collectively together, but I think we still need to be talking to them, I think, about the control practices that they have, the role modeling that they do. And of course, we know media literacy is going to be very important. We're teaching it in the schools. I know we cover it in our program, so we've got to continue to do that and get kids to understand these people are trying to sell you something, okay? Turning off the screens and distractions when eating. So I couldn't leave without discussing this, the importance of family meals. I think we need to get this out. And I'm not talking about eating together every night, because we know that in the society and the world we live in, it might not be possible for everybody. And I don't want to put blame on some of the families that I deal with who have single parents. They're trying to make it all work, get their kids to things. I'm not putting any blame, but if we could try to eat together a little bit, there's more than just healthy eating on the line. Okay, we know that kids will eat healthier if they eat in family meals, but look at all the other stuff that is improved self-esteem, social skills and manners, communication skills, feeling connected with your family, that ultimately will lead to a decrease in risky behaviors. For adolescents, this is really important, and studies have shown decreases in smoking, decreases teenage pregnancy, decreased thoughts of suicide, right, and decreased drug use. And it's this interconnectedness, sitting down and actually connecting. It's something I love to do with my nieces. I love to hear what they hear, right? It was very interesting during the whole debacle in the States when somebody came into power, right? Because you have these little kids, and my niece came home one day, I love to tell this story, and she goes, "Trump doesn't like women." And I was like, okay, let's talk about that. And it was a great chance for her and her mom, or me and her mom, to talk about equality and all this kind of stuff, and don't believe what you hear, and anyway. So it's a great opportunity to connect with your kids. They also see better academic performance. So I think that we could be selling this and trying to sell this a little bit more, turning off those screens and spending a little bit of time together. Not every night, but we do the best we can. What else to do? If you're going to be partaking in sedentary behavior, offer good snacks. We just did a whole water does wonders things. Offer water and all the other things that we said about water, right? Offer fruits and vegetables. Dip. Dip's fun. Kids love dip, right? So dip in fruits and veggies, make that available. There's yogurt dips with fruit. Yeah, we don't need the dips, but if that makes it fun for a child, why not? There's popcorn, there's rice cakes, there's things out there that we can choose so we don't have to have what I call the high-octane foods. Now, the next one is not the hard-hitting piece of advice of my list, but if you know that there's going to be a lot of sedentary behavior happening, let's say you know you're going to the movies, you know you're going to spend some time doing that, why not alter what you do in the day? Certainly what I do. You know, if I know I'm going to the movies, I like popcorn. I love movie popcorn. If I'm going to partake in that, then I know during the day, I might alter what I eat a little bit. So why don't you alter what you offer for dinner? I mean, it's a silly little thing, but it's something that you can do so that you're not getting. Now, I know on an everyday basis, that's going to be a challenge, but it's just another strategy to consider. And finding alternatives to sedentary behavior is going to be the big thing that I think most of us will be focusing most of our time on. Is how do we get kids away from the screens when they don't need to be, right? It's not for their learning. But what can we do? And I think a lot of research that's come out to date is saying breaking up prolonged periods of sitting is very important. So they're calling it physical activity snacking. And I think that's become a very important idea. So is there ways that if kids are going to be sitting and watching something, is there ways that we could get them active during the commercials or something like that, something they could do while they're watching TV to make them a little bit more active? But I think that's probably where the majority of our work is going to be. Right? So thank you for letting me come and talk to you again today. I think we have a time for a couple questions if anybody wanted to ask anything. One question. Yeah, I don't know the specifics, but if I would have to guess, it would be eating breakfast in front of the TV in the morning, right? I know I've seen my nieces occasionally do that. It would be after school, having your afternoon snack and doing that in front of some kind of device. And then it's the fact that families are actually eating dinners in front of the TV, or mom's busy getting everybody ready to go to an activity, and the kids are eating in front of the TV by themselves, right? So when you start to add that all up, then it would add up to 20 to 25%. That would be my estimate. Yeah.